The night my parents handed my brother a Tesla wrapped in a blood-red bow, they gave me a scented candle labeled Calm. I smiled for the live stream, but inside, something cracked. I was the daughter who paid her own bills, who stayed invisible so they could shine, yet every joke cut deeper, every silence louder. Then I overheard whispers about a secret fund, money meant for both of us. My pulse thundered. This wasn't favoritism anymore. It was betrayal carved into my skin. At midnight, I blocked them and began planning the one thing they never expected: my freedom. The house looked like something plucked straight out of a glossy lifestyle feed, every corner curated for strangers scrolling through screens. The lawn was shaved to perfection, flowers arranged in pastel coordination, the kind of view that begged for drone footage. Inside, the dining table gleamed under soft lighting, with place settings designed less for comfort and more for applause. My parents floated from chair to chair like hosts of their own reality show, their smiles wide, their movements rehearsed. Phones were always propped at angles, ready to capture candid moments that never felt candid at all. They called me over, slipping me into a frame while Dad announced, "Here's our independent daughter, always thriving on her own." The crowd of relatives nodded politely, and the live stream comments flooded with heart emojis. To them, it sounded like praise. To me, it was a sentence. Independent meant invisible. Independent meant they could shower my brother with accolades and gifts while reminding the world that I needed nothing. I smiled as the camera panned my face, cheeks stiff, eyes hollow. The moment the phone screens dimmed, the warmth drained from their expressions. Mom's lips tightened and she whispered through her teeth, "Straighten up, Claire. You look tired." Dad adjusted his cufflinks and muttered, "Don't sulk. Tyler's big reveal is tonight." Their eyes slid past me, already elsewhere. In that flicker of honesty, I was no longer the daughter, no longer family, just a prop to complete the frame. The performance picked up again when Tyler walked in, laptop bag slung over his shoulder like a badge of honor. Everyone clapped. Mom kissed his cheek with a theatrical flourish. Dad clapped his back, and a cheer rose up as though he'd won a Nobel. A box appeared in his hands, sleek, silver, unmistakable. A brand new MacBook. Cameras flashed. "Our boy is building the future," Dad boomed, pride swelling his chest. Then, without fanfare, Mom turned to me and placed a small package on my lap. I peeled back the wrapping to reveal a cheap plastic vase, its flowers stiff and eternal in their artificial bloom. "Pretty, isn't it?" she said, her voice honeyed. "Something simple for your apartment. You don't need all the flashy things, sweetheart. You're already so stable." The room laughed as if stability were a punchline. My throat tightened. I forced myself to nod, because contradicting them would only trigger another lecture about how I overreacted. Still, my insides twisted. Gaslighting didn't always come in screaming. Sometimes it came wrapped in paper and ribbon, disguised as love. I stared at Tyler polishing his laptop screen, his smile smug, and wondered how many people watching truly believed this scene. The dinner carried on in waves of small talk, cameras clicking intermittently as though proof of joy was more important than joy itself. Tyler bragged about his startup, sprinkling buzzwords like confetti. Dad repeated each phrase with reverence, as if they were scripture. When I mentioned my recent project at work, a complex system migration I had led, Mom waved it off with a quick, "That sounds complicated, honey. Tyler, tell us more about your app." Laughter, nods, more cameras. I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to fetch more water. Away from the audience, I leaned against the counter, heart pounding against my ribs. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, as though I were a guest in my own story. My parents' voices drifted from the hall. At first, I thought they were still rehearsing lines for the next clip, but the words sharpened, cutting through the house like shards of glass. "Did you finalize the account for Tyler?" Dad asked. "Yes," Mom answered, her tone quick and decisive. "The fund is locked in his name. Claire doesn't need it. She'll manage like always." "Good," Dad said, lowering his voice, but not enough. "We can't split resources. He's the one who'll carry the family forward. She's fine on her own." The blood rushed to my ears. My legs stiffened as if nailed to the floor. A secret fund, resources diverted. All for Tyler. My breath caught, but I didn't move. They spoke with such ease, as though my life had been reduced to a calculation. What could be extracted? What could be discarded? I stepped back quietly, careful not to creak the floorboards. My pulse throbbed in my temples, my throat dry. Every cell in my body screamed to burst into the room, to demand an explanation, to tell them I had heard every word. But I froze. Because deep down, I already knew what they would say. They would call me dramatic, accuse me of twisting their words, remind me again that I was independent. So I swallowed it down, pressing my nails into my palms until half-moon marks stained my skin. I plastered a smile back on when I rejoined the table, as if nothing had shifted. The cameras caught my face again, my laughter timed with theirs. But inside, the cracks widened. And as Tyler tapped away on his gleaming laptop, basking in the glow of manufactured admiration, I couldn't stop hearing my parents' words echoing behind the curtain of performance. She doesn't need it. She'll manage like always. The next weeks blurred into a parade of curated perfection, only now it streamed straight into every corner of my life. My parents had made a project out of Tyler's image, sharing clips of him pitching ideas on TikTok, reposting interviews he staged with friends, captioning every post with phrases like, "Our prodigy," "the future of innovation." Notifications lit my phone, even though I never asked to see them. Each post carried hundreds of likes, comments about how proud his family must be. The irony stung. I was the invisible scaffolding holding this illusion, yet to the world, I didn't exist. I discovered I had been quietly removed from the family group chat. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I texted my mother, and she replied with a brisk, "Oh, Tyler wanted to streamline things." The phrase felt like code for exile. I opened Instagram one evening and saw photos from a family barbecue. Tyler flipping burgers, Mom holding lemonade, Dad raising a toast. My chair at the table, the one I always sat in, was filled by a neighbor's child. No one mentioned I hadn't been invited. A few days later, my friend Jenna sent me a message. "Claire, I think you should see this." Attached was a screenshot from the barbecue photo before it had been posted. I blinked at the screen. There I was, standing at the edge of the yard, smiling faintly. And in the final version shared online, I was gone, cropped neatly out as if I had never been there. "They asked me to edit you out," Jenna admitted over the phone, voice trembling. "Your mom said it would look cleaner." The words lodged like glass shards. Not only had I been erased from their world, they had instructed others to erase me too. I pressed the phone to my ear, trying to breathe, but the air felt thinner, poisoned. Late that night, as I scrolled through empty notifications, a new message appeared from an unknown number. "They're using your name to borrow money." My chest seized. My fingers hovered, trembling, but the sender never replied again. I read the line over and over, each repetition darker than the last. I wanted to believe it was a prank, but a part of me, the part that had overheard my parents whispering about the fund for Tyler, knew better. The thought gnawed at me. What else had they stolen under the guise of love? Days blurred. I carried myself through work like a ghost, trying to mask the storm inside. The annual charity gala, run by my parents and paraded as proof of our family's generosity, loomed ahead. I had managed details quietly for years. Vendor lists, donation ledgers, volunteer shifts. This time, chaos erupted. Vendors called, furious about unpaid deposits. Volunteers complained of missing schedules. When I tried to explain the mishaps, Dad cut me off. "Claire, you've always been too careless. This is why Tyler handles the important things now." His voice rang out in front of staff and relatives, sealing me as the scapegoat. The shame burned hotter than any fever. That night, Tyler draped an arm around me as if consoling. Cameras clicked as he leaned close. To anyone watching, it looked like brotherly comfort. But his whisper sliced cold against my ear. "You were born to be background. Without me, you're nothing." He smiled for the flash while my insides collapsed. The body keeps score. Sleep deserted me. I lay awake with my heart hammering, nausea coiling until I stumbled to the bathroom and retched. At work, my hands shook over the keyboard, simple tasks stretching into impossible mountains. Every sound, phone rings, door creaks, made me flinch. My reflection grew paler, eyes ringed with shadows, until I hardly recognized the woman staring back. One evening, exhausted and half delirious, I sifted through a stack of gala paperwork, searching for answers. My gaze snagged on a form, an application for a substantial loan, supposedly tied to the event. My signature scrawled across the bottom stared back at me. Except it wasn't my handwriting. My breath caught. The loops and strokes mimicked me clumsily, but it was forged. The room tilted. The message returned to me. They're using your name to borrow money. It wasn't a warning. It was evidence. They hadn't just erased me from photos or group chats. They had stolen my very identity, grafting it onto debts I had never agreed to. I dropped the papers, hands trembling so hard they rattled against the table. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The walls seemed to close in, heavy with betrayal, and all I could hear was the echo of Tyler's words. You were born to be background. But if that were true, why had they needed my name to build their empire? The driveway glittered under fairy lights strung like a stage, every detail curated for an audience that extended far beyond the house. Tripods lined the lawn, ring lights hummed faintly, waiting to catch the perfect angles. Neighbors, friends, distant relatives all gathered as though this was a coronation, not a birthday. Phones tilted up, streaming the spectacle into thousands of feeds. I stood at the edge, a paper cup of punch clutched too tightly in my hand. The scent of gasoline mingled with perfume as the new car rolled into view. Sleek, silver, spotless, a Tesla gleaming beneath a giant bow the color of arterial blood. Gasps erupted, and then applause. My parents beamed into the cameras, narrating as though selling a dream. Our brilliant son Tyler, our pride, our future, deserves nothing less than the best. Tyler swaggered toward the car, his grin already rehearsed. He pressed the key fob and the car lights blinked like applause. Someone started chanting his name. My parents joined in, their arms thrown around his shoulders as though he had conquered the world. Then a small box was pressed into my hands. A scented candle, lavender, cheap. My mother said, almost offhandedly, "We thought this would help you relax, sweetheart. You're always so serious." The crowd laughed, soft but cruel, the kind of laugh that turns a person into a punchline. I held the candle, its wax sweating in my palm, while the cameras panned. I forced my lips into something resembling gratitude. Inside, something broke cleanly, like glass snapping along a seam. I wondered how many people watching believed this scene was love, and then I wondered how many had lived it themselves, becoming the family's joke while everyone clapped. Applause roared again as Tyler slid into the driver's seat, honking the horn like a victory lap. My parents waved, basking in the glow. I stared at the bow, impossibly red against the metal, and thought, it wasn't a gift. It was a weapon. As the party buzzed, a relative leaned too close to me, glassy with wine. "If your grandmother were alive," he muttered, "she'd be furious about this." His words snagged my breath. Furious about what? The car? The favoritism? Or something deeper? Before I could ask, he stumbled away into the crowd, swallowed by lights and laughter. The night blurred into noise, a kaleidoscope of camera flashes and hollow praise. By the time I slipped away to my room, my body shook with a grief too large to name. I collapsed on the floor, sobs tearing through me until the walls blurred. Hours passed. When I woke, my throat was raw, my body numb, as though I had cried myself empty. I didn't answer texts. Calls from friends went ignored. The world outside felt unreachable, and inside I was weightless, untethered. At moments, dark thoughts whispered, maybe it would be easier to stop existing altogether, to surrender to the silence they had been carving for years. One night, searching for something, anything to anchor me, I rummaged through the attic boxes stacked with dust. My hands brushed against a leather-bound journal, cracked with age. My grandmother's handwriting looped across the first page. My chest tightened as I sank to the floor, flipping through her words. She wrote of fairness, of her dreams for her grandchildren, of her disappointment in how her children valued appearances over honesty. Then came a passage that froze my blood. I have prepared a will, equal shares for both Claire and Tyler. They must know they are valued the same. My pulse thundered. Equal shares, a will I had never seen, never heard about. If such a document existed, it had been hidden, buried deliberately. I flipped faster, pages rustling like whispers of a truth long denied. My grandmother had left more than love. She had left a safeguard, and someone had stolen it. As I reached the back, the journal ended abruptly. The last page had been torn out, jagged edges still visible. My hands trembled. Who had taken it? Why? What had they been so desperate to erase? The room felt colder. The candle from the party still sat on my desk, its wick unlit, mocking me with its label, calm. I stared at it until my eyes blurred, the question pounding through me like a drumbeat I couldn't escape. Who had ripped the final page, and what truth had they stolen from me? Days bled into each other after the Tesla spectacle, but a different kind of fire began to stir inside me. At first, it was just anger, sharp and wild, but it refused to burn out. I needed answers. I needed something to hold on to besides humiliation and grief. Nights that once swallowed me in silence now found me scrolling through articles, listening to podcasts about family dynamics, devouring books that spoke words I had never known but had always lived: scapegoat child, golden child, narcissistic parents. The pages read like maps of my life. Every example mirrored me, every gaslight, every erasure, every moment I was told I was fine without love. For the first time, I realized I wasn't broken. I was chosen to carry the blame so they could shine. That knowledge burned hotter than my rage, and for once the fire didn't consume me. It lit my way forward. If I don't save myself, I whispered into the stillness of my apartment, I'll die in the dark. The thought didn't scare me. It solidified me. I reached out to a local support group, half afraid to speak, but desperate not to drown. Their faces, strangers yet familiar, nodded as I shared my story. They didn't flinch. They didn't call me dramatic. They said words I hadn't heard in years. We believe you. The relief cracked something inside me again, but this time it wasn't despair. It was the first fracture toward freedom. How many others, I wondered, were still trapped in the roles their families wrote for them, believing the lies, playing the scapegoat without even knowing it? One evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. The line was filled with static before a shaky voice whispered, "Claire, it's your cousin. You need to know the truth about your grandmother's fund." My pulse spiked, but before I could respond, the call cut off. The silence left behind rang louder than any scream. I leaned against the wall, clutching the phone as if it might shatter in my hand. The truth wasn't just buried. It was alive, whispering through cracks in the facade. Someone else knew. Someone else wanted me to see. That night, I began collecting. Every text message where my parents dismissed me, every screenshot of cropped photos, every email where I was erased. I pulled bank statements, printed receipts, traced the tangled threads of the gala's finances. Slowly, a picture formed. Not just favoritism, but manipulation, deception, theft. I met with a therapist weekly, her calm voice helping me uncoil the years of shame I'd carried like armor. With her encouragement, I sought out a lawyer. Sitting across from him in a cold office, I laid out my stack of papers, my trembling hands betraying the storm inside me. He flipped through the documents carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "You've got more here than you realize," he said finally. "This isn't just mistreatment, it's fraud, identity misuse. And if you want—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. If you want, this could bring everything down. I stared at him, the air heavy between us. My heart raced with a cocktail of terror and exhilaration. Could I really do it? Could I expose them? In the following days, I reached out to Aunt Marie, the sister my parents had cut off years ago. She welcomed me with tearful arms, saying she had been waiting for this moment. She confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Tyler wasn't free either. He was their golden child, but he was also their pawn. They built him up, fed his ego, paraded him around because his image polished theirs. And when he faltered, they pushed harder, chained him tighter to their expectations. He wasn't thriving, he was drowning, and he didn't even know it. The realization twisted my insides. Tyler had mocked me, humiliated me, whispered venom into my ear. But was he truly the enemy? Or was he, too, a casualty in our parents' theater? Still, sympathy didn't erase the scars. He had chosen to play along, chosen to crush me to keep his throne. The evidence piled up until it felt like a weight I could finally wield. Late one night, my lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the desk toward me. "If you release this letter," he said, his voice almost reverent, "your family will collapse. Everything they've built, their reputation, their power, it will fall in an instant." I gripped the envelope, my knuckles white, my breath shallow. The decision pressed against me, immense and irreversible. For the first time, the power was mine. The night before the gala, I barely slept. Stacks of papers lay spread across my desk. Screenshots, bank statements, messages, photographs. Each one was a shard of the truth, sharp enough to cut through the performance my parents had built for decades. My lawyer's words replayed in my head. "If you release this, it all collapses." By dawn, my decision was carved into me. The gala opened with glitter and champagne, chandeliers sparkling over guests in gowns and tuxedos. Cameras hovered like vultures, catching every smile. My parents worked the crowd with polished charm, introducing Tyler as the visionary behind the foundation's future initiatives. He strutted on stage, basking in admiration, oblivious to the storm I had set in motion. One by one, I forwarded the files. To the board of directors, to the donors, to a curated list of journalists. Each email carried attachments that stripped the facade bare. Forged signatures, missing funds, identity misuse, even screenshots of messages where my parents mocked the very volunteers they paraded as family. My fingers trembled as I hit send, but underneath the fear was a rising calm, like exhaling after years underwater. It didn't take long. Whispers rippled through the ballroom as phones buzzed. A sponsor excused himself, his face pale. Another followed. By the time Tyler finished his speech, half the front tables were empty. A headline pinged across screens. "Charity Gala rocked by allegations of fraud." My parents' smiles froze, their charm cracking at the edges. Donors demanded answers. Staff whispered. Journalists edged closer with cameras rolling. Mom clutched Dad's arm, her knuckles white, as if physical contact could hold together the fragments of their collapsing empire. I slipped outside into the cool night, lungs gulping fresh air. That was when a man approached, rumpled suit, press badge swinging from his pocket. "Claire?" he asked softly. "I'm with the Chronicle." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "Your grandmother once contacted us. She wanted to file a statement about your father. She claimed he'd been siphoning family funds long before Tyler was born." My stomach lurched. I thought of her journal, the missing page. My voice rasped. "Do you still have it?" He shook his head. "We never got the full letter. She died before we could follow up, but she tried to warn the world." The revelation hollowed me out. My parents hadn't just rewritten my story, they'd silenced hers. I stared at the reporter, fury and sorrow colliding in my chest. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. A new email blinked across the screen. From Dad. Subject: "You'll regret betraying this family." Message: "You think you've won, but blood is blood. You've destroyed everything. "You'll pay for this." My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. His words weren't just anger, they were a curse. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The fallout struck fast. News spread beyond the gala, bleeding into every feed, every trending list. Netizens dissected the evidence I had unleashed. The Foundation's social media pages flooded with outrage, screenshots, demands for accountability. Tyler tried to salvage his brand with a shaky live stream, but his charm faltered. Mid-sentence, donors withdrew their support in the comments. He slammed the laptop shut on camera, the humiliation broadcast to thousands. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Tyler shouted at my parents, veins bulging, his voice carrying through thin walls. "You did this! You pushed me into this circus! You used me!" For the first time, his mask slipped. The golden child was no longer gilded. My parents responded with tears, not for guilt, but for image. Mom sobbed into her phone, filming a shaky apology video. Dad barked scripted lines about misunderstandings. The internet tore them apart, digging up old interviews, resurfacing contradictions. Their empire, once polished gold, turned to ash in the public eye. I sat in my apartment, watching it unfold, not with glee, but with a strange stillness. This wasn't just my story anymore. It echoed wider. Every comment thread filled with people saying, "This happened to me. My family did this too. I know what it's like to be erased." The screen became a mirror of 1,000 hidden scars, and in that mirror, I realized something. I wasn't alone. My private war was part of a greater pattern, a chorus of voices finally breaking silence. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The next morning, an envelope waited outside my door. No return address. No markings except my name scrawled across in bold, hurried ink. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single folded document. My grandmother's handwriting curled across the page. At the top, clear and undeniable, were the words, "Last Will and Testament." The original, untouched. The storm did not pass quietly. It ripped everything bare. Tyler's startup collapsed within weeks. Investors who once praised his vision filed lawsuits claiming fraud and mismanagement. News anchors discussed the downfall nightly, headlines flashing his face with words like scandal and collapse. For the first time, he was forced to stand without the cushion of family praise, and the fall was merciless. My parents fared no better. Cousins and distant uncles stopped answering their calls. Old friends blocked them online. The perfect couple, once hosts of every glossy family gathering, were now pariahs in their own community. I heard whispers that neighbors crossed the street to avoid them, that they were turned away from country clubs where they had once been the centerpiece of every gala. The phone rang one evening. I nearly ignored it, but curiosity tugged. On the other end was my aunt, her voice unsteady. "Claire, I'm sorry. We all saw what happened, but I never realized how bad it was for you. I should have believed you sooner." Other calls followed, hesitant, apologetic, some filled with shame. For years I had been invisible. Now, at last, my absence had left a mark. And yet, even as justice unfolded, a weight remained in my hands. My grandmother's will. I held the fragile paper, my eyes tracing her familiar handwriting. She had left everything equal, as if to plant fairness into soil already poisoned. But her words carried more than legality. They carried her voice, her intent. I stood at the window of my apartment, staring out at the city lights, torn between choices. If I took it to court, the destruction of my parents would be final, undeniable. Their wealth, their home, their carefully crafted facade, it would all vanish. But another voice whispered, "Isn't it gone already? What was left to prove?" I clenched the paper tighter, torn between vengeance and release. For a long time, I couldn't decide, but the world kept moving, and so did I. I signed a lease for a new apartment, small but sunlit, with windows that faced the morning. I bought a second-hand couch, painted the walls a warm cream, and planted herbs on the sill. One afternoon, I adopted a scrappy little dog from the shelter, a shaggy mutt with wide brown eyes who wagged his tail like I was the first person to truly see him. I named him Chance. He followed me everywhere, curling beside me at night, offering a love without conditions. Piece by piece, I rebuilt. I opened a blank page online and began to write, not just about myself, but about the pattern, about scapegoat children who were silenced, about families who built kingdoms on the backs of one forgotten soul. I wrote about healing, about boundaries, about learning that freedom sometimes looks like walking away. Readers came, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, comments filled with tears and relief. This is my story, too. I thought I was alone. And then, one quiet night, I returned to my grandmother's will. My eyes caught on a section I hadn't studied before, written in her careful script. It wasn't about money at all. It was a message. The one who dares to rise, who breaks the silence, inherits more than wealth. They inherit the strength to change everything. The words hit me harder than any verdict could. It wasn't about courtrooms or settlements. It was about the courage to step out of the shadows and claim a life. She had seen me, even when no one else had. She had believed in me enough to leave behind not just assets, but a truth. That survival was not defeat. Survival was victory. I folded the will gently, placed it back into its envelope, and set it in a box with her journal. For now, that was enough. The next morning, I walked Chance through the park. The air was crisp, the sky pale blue. People laughed, children ran, the world seemed softer than it had in years. For once, I didn't carry the weight of invisibility. I carried myself. As we reached the hilltop, I paused, the city sprawling below. My life was not gold, not polished, not staged. It was raw, matte, imperfect, and it was mine. I smiled, a deep, quiet smile that belonged to no camera, no performance, no approval but my own. And in that smile, I knew the truth. Revenge wasn't about destroying them. Revenge was living real while they remained trapped in their hollow play.